I'm Gina Fitt, and you've either surfed to or purposely selected Life Talk with Vern Moses. Welcome to another and ongoing series of verbal essays coming to you in this television format. Tonight we have a very special show, and I'd like to introduce to you our two guests. We have Bob Cox and Deanna Reed from Good News, the magazine for positive thinkers. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you here this evening. Maybe I could ask, what led you to this name for your magazine, Good News?
Well, basically I started with the concept over a year ago, and I've been involved in personal growth and development for over 4 years. And I ran it across several people, and they like the idea. They like the idea of something that just spells it out, that you don't have to try and guess what it's all about, that it's about positive people doing positive things. And we just basically would like to show their contributions to their communities. And a lot of people have done a lot of amazing things that I think can inspire other people that are maybe less fortunate.
Great. You know, and that kind of makes me think about the fact that Good News is kind of like our show. They're both brought to the public free of charge and as an effort and an attempt to share positive ways of thinking and ways to, as Vern says, have power in your life and in your living and in making a living. And Deanna, I understand you're the editor of the magazine.
Yep, that's correct. I'm the editor. I work closely with Bob, coordinating the stories, and get to talk to a lot of these people who are very interesting, have a really special story to tell, and I get to bring that to our readers.
That's great. Yeah. It's a pleasure for us to have you on the show this evening, and I understand that you have some questions for Vern, and I want to mention to our audience that the show is unscripted and unrehearsed and certainly will be unedited, and it's our attempt to give the media a forum to express their point of view or to ask any questions that they have regarding Vern's material. So feel free to ask away, and I'm sure that we'll have a lively, interesting discussion with Vern this evening.
We look forward to it.
Right. Well, we promise not to sling any mud. Basically, the first question I had, because what we did is Dan and I discussed before the interview, we wanted to have it kind of free-flowing, and I allowed Deanna to have a little bit more structure with her questions, and I purposely kind of stayed away from the information so that I could see it through the eyes of someone who hasn't gotten real familiar with your information and material. But I've heard some really positive things about what you've done. I think what I'd like to know, and maybe some of our other readers would like to know, is how you got started in personal growth, excuse me, and how it kind of evolved into what you're doing now.
Probably the overwhelm that I experienced back in 1955. I was in the Navy, and they lost my pay records. And most people don't realize it, but if they lose your pay records, they don't pay you. And they told me that it might be weeks, possibly months, before they found the records or could restructure them from Washington. And it did take a long time. And in the interim, I looked for some spare time work because I had a family to support. And the only thing I could find was selling, and I wasn't prepared. I've been a stutterer since I was 6 years old. Introverted, shy, had a certain rage in me from the teasing, the mimicking, and the mocking that I'd experienced. And I kept walking away from interviews. And one day there was a knock on the door, and a young fellow was selling kitchen knives. It was called Cutco. And that was a long time ago, and I understand they're still out there in the world doing their job. And he invited me to go to work for the company when I told him I couldn't buy anything. And I told him that I couldn't sell, and he said, well, you don't have to worry about that in this case because this product sells itself. And I fell for that, especially because he wasn't very good. He wasn't very good at what he was doing, and I realized since then you don't really have to be so long as you're there and you care. And he seemed to, because he was offering me an opportunity, and I responded, and nearly didn't make the interview, but I found myself there. Never saw him again, by the way. He wasn't at the interview that he'd scheduled, and I've been looking for him ever since.
Thank you.
Not to ostracize, but to give him a big hug and say thank you for affording me the opportunity that I've had, and specifically for being able to convey information on to tens of thousands of other people that I found. First 2 years were terrible, terrible. And in 1957, I began to have some breakthroughs. Frankly, they came, they were stimulated by Earl Nightingale, and a traditional old name in the personal growth industry, and Ben Sweetland, who had written the book I Can. And I had a moment, it occurred over an 8 to 10 day period, where I had a psychic shift, I call it. It was an awareness that came over to me that wasn't on the record or in the book, but those ideas stimulated this. And that was that what I'd been doing for the first quarter century of my life was reacting to circumstances and accommodating conditions. I look around my life and I see most people doing that today, frankly, unconsciously, just like I was. But I recognized I didn't have to do that anymore, except by choice. And so I decided that rather than reacting to circumstances, I could become a circumstance. Those become causative instead of being at effect. And that I could, instead of accommodating conditions, establish conditions that other people might accommodate, because it's our nature to do that. And just in that shifting, I went from 1,200th manager with the company I was with at the time to #1 in 90 days. Same product, same price, same wife, everything, all the denominators were the same, except this mental shift. And at that point, I made the commitment to do what I'm doing today. I wanted to convey that, to share it with the world. Since then, there's been a lot of research, a lot of pressing the envelope, a lot of personal exposure, experimentation, and thousands of interviews, and working with literally thousands of people in a very volatile environment where, you know, in creative direct selling, when people come in and they're independent, they're on commission and, you know, totally dependent upon their own initiative and their own strength, boy, I'll tell you, you find human behavior evidencing itself very quickly. Because if there's a weakness or a shortcoming in an individual, it's going to come up like cream on milk. And so you can address it and work with it and sometimes correct it and find people just blossom and mature and grow. It's been an exciting adventure. But I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's how I got started.
Right.
And what I was concerned about was that I was hearing the same thing over and over again. And so I took a pretty obtuse position in '57 and said, I'm not buying that anymore. I respect, I enjoy, I appreciate all of the mentors that have been out here, but I have to challenge everything they say because of the results we're getting. And those, in spite of all the teaching and all the books and all the sermons and homilies, we're still getting the results of a too small percentage of the people. People who've heard the information, people who know the rules, know what to do, and know that they can do it but don't. And it's the ones who don't that I've been concentrating on. In other words, what is it that they didn't hear? What didn't they understand that could make the difference? And so that's the intention.
You suppose it has to do something with core beliefs?
Core beliefs? I'm not familiar with the term. I presume you're talking about a spiritual base that we have in our life, perhaps? Or what do
it
you
could
mean
be
by
spiritual,
core
or it could be upbringing. In other words, if someone believes, has a sincere belief that they can accomplish whatever their heart's desire is, they can go out and do it. But if they don't, if there's maybe some programming from the past, maybe from
I had the
someone who said, well, you know, you got to be realistic, and you've got to set you set yourself up to this level, but don't get too high because you may set yourself up for a letdown.
Well, I was set up my whole life for mediocrity. There's no question. I did not have the basis to, and a lot of it came from just challenging the things that I've been told, I've been heard. You know, we do have a certain authority after we reach a certain age. There's no question, until we're 6, we're kind of subject to our authority figures. And then from about 6 to 12, there's a shifting of the mind, and we begin to get more outside of ourselves, and then we begin to participate ourselves in the diminishment. And then at 12, of course, it really kicks in. We try to disappear in the crowd because we don't know who we are. And so we beat up on ourselves oftentimes. You know, that's what conforming is among the teenagers, trying to find a place for themselves. Around 18, though, we begin to be in command. At 18, the tools are available out here now if a person will reach out and, you know, for publications and shows and what have you, like what we do, they can get the tools. And then if they start applying them, there can be some major movement in people's lives. I've seen it. And so, now it doesn't always happen. Could always happen, just doesn't. And so we don't have all the answers yet by any means, but we do have some complementary ones, some new, fresh ones, some new perspectives, and that's what we're trying to promulgate.
It seems to me that in your essays you really take a different approach to self-improvement or motivation than most of the speakers out there right now. And what I got from your shows was that you say don't so much focus on yourself, but on how you interact with other people. And that goes, I really got that from your closing. You say go out and make it a good day for somebody else.
Right.
So is that kind of how you put your focus on how you interact with all of the people?
Yeah, there's a little thing that we've said on the show in the past, and I'm sure we'll again, that selflessness seems to be the highest form of selfishness.
Right.
Because it's the selfless people who are getting what the selfish people want.
Right.
And what is that? Okay, we're all seeking peace of mind and esteem.
Happiness.
Yeah, peace of mind and esteem, and the way to find that is to get outside of ourselves. Even to challenge the old saw that until you love yourself, you can't love anybody else. I had trouble with that over the years, and it wasn't working for me. And so I began to get outside myself and really focusing and caring on other people, and found out who I was.
It's
You know
easier
what I mean? In
to
other
do
words,
that.
I understand, but it's taking that other perspective, because the first one didn't seem to be working, not only for myself, but for a lot of people. See what I'm saying? So it's shifting, taking an obtuse position on a lot of things. Doesn't mean that they're wrong. I'm not saying there's a
Right.
wrongness there. It's just there has to be another way. See, there's a tendency in our society, if we find a correct answer, then that's the answer. We stop looking.
You just
You know?
narrow in.
Yeah,
on
I
that.
say keep looking. There may be another answer and another and another. And so this is what that's about.
I think the more that you search for other answers, the more your creative powers and your mental stimulation is increased. And you find, as Bern has spent his life doing, you find other answers that maybe are more applicable to different situations and the pat answer.
Things you might not have
Right.
found if you
Things you
hadn't
might
kept
not have found,
searching.
something that maybe is better or more appropriate. At least you need to ask the questions, and I think that's something that Bern's been very good at, is asking the questions. That makes a difference.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the mirror effect. It sounds like what you're talking about is what you see in other people. Oftentimes, like, for example, if there's a characteristic that someone has, maybe they're selfish or maybe they're outgoing, that you either like or dislike, it's oftentimes a reflection of your own self. And it
Oh,
sounds
yeah.
like that's the way you're trying to get across.
Possibly.
In your essays, and you mentioned that you're trying to give people the tools or the keys to make positive changes in their lives. What are you referring to in regards to those tools? What is that?
Oh, okay. What I find when I listen to most of the speakers and read most of the books, and if you really look carefully, they're addressing and revealing, if you would, a lot of the rules of the game. You know, this is what you should do.
This is how to do
Yeah,
it.
yeah. And it's the so-called motivational bent that most people have. And what I'm saying is that my life has been filled with people who knew what to do and knew how to do it that weren't doing it. And so they were lacking something, and so it has to be the tool. For example, if we've made the analogy before that you can know all the rules of a football game. I mean, we know that if you move a ball 10 yards forward, you get another try, or 4 more times to do it again. You cross the goal line, you get 6 points. You step out of bounds, the ball comes back into play. If you clip someone from behind, you lose 10 yards. I mean, anybody can know the rules, but you're not going to win the game unless you got the tools. And what are the tools in football? Size and speed and strength and a certain amount of intellect. How about life? See, what is that about? For example, one of the rules is forgive and forget. Well, that's all well and good, but how do you do that? See, and this is what we're talking
It's
about.
hard.
It's
hard
right.
to do
We're
that.
teaching how to do that, the actual tool. In other words, it's a perceptual thing. In other words, we have the capacity not to forgive and forget, but to forgive and reperceive, to understand, and to love because of, not in spite of. And so it's those kind of things we don't have time for this evening, but it's taking that extra step and giving us tools. For example, we have a thing called the Life Formula. It's a 10-word formula that we put together over, 10 or 12 years. That, I mean, time and time again, people have said it's given them a sense of verticalness, a sense of objectivity that they never had in their lives before. And it's just a little tool, a word tool. Sometimes it's as little as a rubber band or a blue sticker, a word, and awareness. But there are specific tools that people leave. For example, in bereavement, we're about to cover in the next few weeks a whole series on bereavement and grief. And it's kind of like all my life I've been hearing people say, well, everyone grieves in their own way. And I contend it's because they haven't been given a way to grieve. You know what I mean? There is a specific process that we found that a person can go through and come out at the other end of a loss in a much healthier state than they otherwise would have been.
Yeah.
And even correct 10 and 20 and 30 and 40-year-old bereavements within a matter of hours because of the tools.
So you're
Yeah.
saying there's a process and maybe a set of rules for grieving that's standard for everyone?
Oh yeah, I would say that every single person, if they follow the process that we've developed, will come out on the other side much healthier, much quicker. Absolutely. It's just that when you see what's going on out here and the language that's being employed, people get stuck so severely. I was there. I was there. I spent 28 years in bereavement from my father when he died and didn't even know it until I knew it. See, we call that a breakthrough. My definition of a breakthrough is that moment when you go, I've got a solution. Didn't even know I had a problem.
It's like the light goes off.
Yeah, didn't even know I had a problem. I just thought, what? That's the way things were.
Yeah.
And it's not. And so, almost every challenge, every overwhelm, every difficulty we have has a dynamic solution to it, and chances are it's going to be expressed semantically, verbally. Because those are the tools that we use in our mind to think with, to make judgments with, and decisions with. And I think, one of the big things we emphasize a lot is semantics,
Right.
which is the derivation of words and the psychic impact they have on who we're becoming. Typically what we've been exposed to is a grammatical experience. This is another issue, of course.
I
But
was going to ask you about that. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Oh, really? What was that? In other words, here's the thing. In other words, you can take words. See, vocabulary is words and their spelling and definitions.
Right.
Okay.
And the proper way to put them all
Yeah,
together.
and grammar is the way to put them together so they make sense.
Right.
And we have a natural instinct for grammar. Vocabulary is something that we need to study and develop as many words as possible. However, semantically, how we put those words together for impact can make a big difference. For example, one of the illustrations we use, in fact, I had a meeting this morning with a number of women, and we got into this parenting idea. And I said, have any of you ever been told that you're responsible for your children? And every hand went up. And I said, how unkind, because we can't be. You can't be responsible for another agenda, another mind. You know what I mean?
When they're really young, you have to because they don't know any better.
Well, we can satisfy it by being responsible to them. See, for example, you ever been on a plane with a little baby?
I've been on a train with a baby.
Yeah. Well, if you're responsible for the baby, and the baby is screaming and crying and fussing for 6 hours
what?
straight, what does that do to you?
Makes you crazy.
You're out of your mind because you're supposed to be in control of this. See, if you're responsible for, you're supposed to be in control. We
Right.
can't be. That baby is on its own. Okay.
Right.
We can only be responsible to the child. So we can nurture and guide and comfort and reassure, whereas opposed, if we're in control, we're going to try to dominate, dictate, mold.
Say, sit down, be quiet.
So it's a whole different relationship,
Right.
but it's a semantical difference.
Right.
Just that little word to or for can change an entire relationship between a parent and child, or a boss and an employee. You know, it's kind of fascinating. And so it's becoming conscious. Like most people who go through our series, in fact, I've already heard it just off Life Talk, off the air, that the language seems different, and people connect with it, and once you get familiar with it, they goes, oh, that makes a difference. Just the language that we use.
Maybe it just gives them a fresh way to hear something and makes them take a second look.
What
Exactly.
I found is a subtle shift in how you say things creates a tremendous shift in how you think about things and a shift in your attitude. And I think that Vern's material on his languaging, for me anyway, has led me to ask more questions instead of automatically taking things for granted or assuming that it's that way. I say, well, wait a minute. Maybe there's another way to think about this as well. And so for me, it's been wonderful each week to come and meet with you, Vern, because I'm always curious about what you're going to say next. What new shift in my thinking is going to occur, because I'm going through the material for the first time, just as you have been. So it's been a great
exciting.
process. Yes, it has.
I don't mean to go back too far, but one thing that stuck in my mind, you're talking about your dad and the breakthrough you had. You were in bereavement for 28 years. Tell us a little bit about that, because I'd like to know more.
I adored him, just adored him, and nice man. And you can't say there was any abuse, except for omission. My father was a non-demonstrative man. Never touched me, never hugged me, never patted me, never spanked me. You know, there was no physical contact in my whole life with him, nor was there any verbal confirmation. In other words, I was brought up in an era, and it wasn't just me, a lot of children had the same circumstance, that parents didn't confirm, didn't elevate, didn't support and applaud their kids because they'd get a big head. You know, they'd get spoiled or something. And so most of us ended up with no head. You know what I mean? No sense of who you were at all. And so when he died, I thought I was fine with it because there was no grief. I mean, I just, you know. And yet 28 years later, I walked into a funeral home one day and into a selection room where there's a lot of caskets. And I mean, boy, something happened to me. I mean, a whale came out of me, and we'll be talking about it in detail in a few weeks. But I convulsed, I got nauseous. In other words, it was a deep, deep grief. And they escorted me out, and I had no idea what was going on. And it took me several days to connect with the fact that it was exactly the same experience I'd had 28 years hence, okay, or prior. And I had walked away from it and recuperated very quickly, found my strength. You're supposed to be strong. Yeah, it's,
Don't let it get
yeah,
to
we
you.
should be celebrating grief, not suffering it. We should be celebrating it, and people don't understand that. We've been misled.
One of the one of the things that happened to me when my father passed away, he same situation. He was my idol. He was my hero, and I had this fear attached with his death because I remember we were driving in the car one day and he pulled off to the side of the road and was clutching his heart, and I was asking him, I said, "What's wrong, Dad? You know, what's going on?" And he couldn't talk. And it went on for like 10 minutes.
Wow.
And I was really shaken up, and he had taken these little funny pills. Well, they were nitroglycerin. And he told me, he said, "Bobby," he said, "I have heart disease." And he explained the terminology of what that all meant. And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" And he goes, "Well, it means I have 5 to 15 years to live." And from that point forward, I lived in constant fear of him because he was so important to me in my life growing up. He was my role model. And I remember nights going into the kitchen and peering around the corner and checking up on him. And I felt that it was my duty, my responsibility to look out for Dad. And it was quite a paradigm shift when 3 years ago he passed away. And I always had this grieving over the years. Every time he'd go in the hospital or every time he'd clutch his heart, and I was just in constant fear of him leaving. And the amazing thing was that our family was gathering around his bed as he was passing away, and we were all together, and it just, I had a total shift. And I think the shift went from fear to love for me. I just realized that all that he had given me was an opportunity for me, just like he said, to celebrate his life. And when I eulogized him, I spoke in terms of the happiness I felt for what he gave to me and my family. And it was incredible. It was something you can't really put into words. It's just something you have to experience. But
it's really tragic in a way that we haven't been educated from the very beginning to understand that it's okay that people die. It has to be okay. Because if it's not, we got two problems. First of all, they're going to, and then we have to deal with it in a different way. You know what I mean? And so if we're having difficulty with death, we're probably having difficulty with life. Philosophers, theologians, and poets have been saying that for centuries. That somehow, as a society, we need to find a way to embrace death and to understand it and to allow it to be there for ourselves and for other people, to open our arms and not cling so tightly to what is. And boy, that can make a difference. In fact, you can better enjoy what you have right now because it may not be there in the very next moment. You were concerned about 5 to 15 years. The chances are you could have gone in an hour. You know what I mean? In other words, and
right
so,
then and there.
Sure. In fact, it happens a lot of times.
Yeah.
So this is a pretty important issue. By the way, we've got about 3 minutes left, so it's amazing how quickly a half hour is gone. You know? Is there anything else you'd like to kind of address here? Do you have any other questions?
No, just when in watching your shows, and one thing that really hit me, I was excited about, was when you were talking about relationships and elationships.
Oh,
and
yes.
I thought that was a really neat way to look at things.
Yeah, I think most relationships don't work, but relationships always will.
It makes you feel happy.
Yeah,
even
it's the
just
thing
the
to
word.
finding two people who can come together and to elevate and support and enhance and enrich one another rather than getting into some kind of a competition with all its one-upmanship. But it's hard to do with the tools we've been given. In other words, we have a discourse on love, for example, that there's so many different kinds, and we've been misunderstanding what they were. And so we have, and we will again be discussing love in its purest forms and the different dimensions and how they can really impact us. But yeah, I'm into relationships. And,
I like that very
you
much.
love it.
With a real feel good.
Because relationship typically is two people coming together to endure. And you know how people even set themselves up. You know, they say, boy, you got to work hard at a relationship. You got to work hard at a marriage.
No, just
Yeah,
enjoy
I don't believe
it.
that.
To work easy.
Yeah, work easy at it. Have fun
Right.
with it. Sure. And I think sometimes we've been misled by the languaging. And they just set us up. Darndest thing.
One of the things that I read recently, it's by Deepak Chopra. He talks about law of least effort, and I'm wondering how that you interpret that.
Say it again now, because I'm not.
It's called the law of least effort.
Law of least effort.
And basically, in our society, in our culture, we're programmed, if you will, to work hard and to put the nose to the grindstone. And you know, if you're not getting the results, well, you put it down a little bit further and you force it in there until something cracks, and usually it's your skull.
I think that's an interesting thing, and Byrne talks about sharpening the axe and the grindstone, and I think that if you try to sharpen an axe the wrong way, you actually end up dulling it, and the work that all that effort and energy you put out actually makes things worse. And that's one of the wonderful things that we discuss on our show. We're getting close to the end of the time here. I think that we want to thank you for coming. It was wonderful to have you. Again, we'd like to encourage our viewers to write or call and give us their comments. We'd love to read their letters on the show and get their feedback. And perhaps Byrne could give us the phone number.
Oh, yes, 1-800-661-3490. That's 1-800-661-3490. And if you want information about Good News Magazine, or more about Life Talk, or if you want to get a cassette tape of the show, or you just want anything, or an address where you can write, where you can call this number and we'll give it to you. The only thing it is, when you call, be sure to say something. So many people choke up when they get on the phone, and just kind of blurt out your name and address and phone number, and we'll give you a call back, and we'll be gracious and kind. I promise. You know, I do want to say I'm gratified by your being here. I was a little anxious. I thought it may be a morally safer deal, 2020 or something, but no, you couldn't have been more kind. And I hope someday perhaps we can do this again.
We love it.
Because I know there's an awful lot of things to cover and that people would like to hear. In the meanwhile, the only thing we do is thank you and thank everyone for watching. Admonish everyone to go out and make it a good day for someone. That way two people can have a nice day. And to remember that all of this is Life Talk, and my name is Byrne
Moses.
Thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Byrne.
Had a good time.
Thank you.
Thanks.